A single Necronomicon sparks 3 terrifying stories, each one enough to make your skin crawl. But even the mysterious and powerful Cthulhu is nothing more than a creation when standing before its author, Lovecraft. In the autumn of 1932, Lovecraft learned that a certain American church had hidden away a magic book, the Necronomicon. He believed this book would help him with his writing, so he used the excuse of doing research to successfully sneak his way inside. The monk warned him repeatedly that he could only read the material in this room, otherwise he would be thrown out. But the monk didn't realize that Lovecraft had already stolen the key. As soon as the monk left, Lovecraft used the key to open the door to a chamber underground, where the Necronomicon was locked inside the deepest vault. Just as Lovecraft began unlocking it, the iron door behind him suddenly slammed shut on its own. He spun around and the key slipped from his hand and fell into the pool of water below. But strangely, the vault opened by itself, and the Necronomicon was resting inside. Completely captivated by it, Lovecraft failed to notice that as soon as he took the Necronomicon out, another hidden door opened within the vault. He opened the Necronomicon and began recording the first story within it. A young businessman named Edward lost his wife in a tragic car accident, so he returned to his hometown to inherit the family property. The luxurious seaside hotel left by his uncle was now his inheritance, but because no one had visited it in 60 years, it looked decayed and dangerous, and Edward nearly tumbled down the stairs to his death. Once upstairs, Edward's eyes were drawn to a portrait hanging on the wall.
Who's that?
You wouldn't know. That's Emma Delapore, your aunt. She died quite young, quite tragically. Drowned in a shipwreck. All the gossip about the hotel started at that time. Jethro Delapore was never the same afterward. He followed her to the grave just a few days after the tragedy.
How did he die?
They found him below the balcony, from what I heard.
His lawyer, Nancy, advised him to sell the hotel as soon as possible, warning that the ocean's erosion would cause it to collapse at any moment. Before leaving, she handed Edward a letter, his uncle's last will and words written by hand. Edward returned to the hotel and opened the letter, only to discover a dark secret. His uncle Jethro often went out to sea with his wife and son for business, but on their last voyage, the ship hit the rocks and sank. When Jethro woke, he saw a doctor treating his fever with bloodletting. He pushed the doctor away and rushed downstairs to find his family, only to see his wife and son lying lifeless on a table while his relatives performed their funeral rites. It turned out that in that disaster, Jethro had been the only survivor. Unable to accept the truth, Jethro hurled himself into the crowd and tossed the Bible from the table into the fire. He drove all his relatives away, wanting only to stay beside his wife and son. But just then, the doors suddenly burst open. Jethro tried to drive the intruder away, but the strange man placed a book on the table, saying Jethro could open it whenever he was in need. The strange man then vanished into the heavy rain. When Jethro lifted the rag covering the book, he realized it was the legendary Necronomicon. As his hand approached it, the book opened by itself, turning to the page on resurrection. Following its instructions, Jethro drew a magic circle in the center of the hall. When he sprinkled blood onto it, the floor instantly absorbed it. The magic circle lit up, and in the next second, a tender voice called out from behind him. Jethro turned around sharply and found it was his deceased son calling him. His wife also sat up on the table, completely unharmed. The son staggered closer to Jethro, but just as Jethro was about to embrace him, the son's eyes suddenly emitted a frightening green light, and tentacles emerged from his mouth. That night, Jethro stood on the edge of his balcony, guilt-ridden for summoning 2 monsters, and in despair, he threw himself into the sea to atone. Although all of the above was only written words, Edward still broke out in a cold sweat. He rushed to the hall, kicked over the table, and found that beneath the carpet there really was a magic circle. Thinking of his own wife's recent death, Edward grabbed a flashlight and searched the house for the Necronomicon, but he couldn't find it. That night he stayed in the hotel. Half asleep, he suddenly heard a voice whispering through the cracks in the floor. Edward jolted awake from the dream, and the first thing he saw was the portrait of his aunt. Yanking the frame from the wall, he found a pitch-black hole behind it. Reaching in, he felt around and indeed pulled out the Necronomicon. Following the instructions, he recited the resurrection incantation, but his wife did not return. Disappointed, Edward returned to bed. Just as he was drifting to sleep, he heard a sound outside the door. Edward's eyes widened in disbelief. Walking in was his recently deceased wife, Clara. Tears streamed down his face as he apologized for his mistake. As they embraced, Edward suddenly felt something was terribly wrong. He shoved Clara away, revealing a thick tentacle sprouting from her back. His body went cold with fear as he grabbed the long knife by the bed and slashed at the tentacle. After letting out an eerie scream, Clara flew into the hall. Before Edward's eyes, Clara transformed into nothing but a giant octopus tentacle. The shadows beneath the floor began writhing, and soon, a monster covered in tentacles burst forth. Edward scrambled onto the chandelier, hoping to escape through the roof, but the tentacles morphed back into Clara's form, clinging tightly to his ankle. This time, Edward refused to be deceived, smashing the glass dome above with his fist. Clara screamed as she fell away. Climbing onto the roof, Edward kicked the chandelier's chain loose, sending the monster crashing back into the depths below. And so, Edward narrowly escaped with his life. Suddenly, Lovecraft abruptly stopped his writing because he noticed something writhing in the pool beneath the chamber. At the same time, he also noticed something strange about the door inside the vault. Although puzzled, he was quickly drawn into the second story. A Boston Daily reporter named Dale knocked on the door of a family's home, hoping to investigate 11 unsolved murders in the neighborhood. The hostess, Annie, agreed to be interviewed, but the moment Dale stepped inside, he realized something was wrong. The temperature inside was colder than an ice cellar. Annie explained that she suffered from a rare disease, one that made her extremely sensitive to heat and sunlight. But Dale wasn't interested in that. He had checked records and knew this house actually belonged to Dr. Madden, not Annie. Seeing Annie refuse to answer, Dale subtly threatened her, saying that as a disciplined writer, he might just embellish the story and publish it. With no other choice, Annie began to tell the story of Dr. Madden. 22 years ago, her mother Emily came here to study flute, and she knocked on the door of this apartment building. Lena saw that she was alone and kindly rented her the second floor, but she reminded her repeatedly never to disturb Dr. Madden on the third floor. After settling in, Emily prepared to take a bath, but from the bruises on her legs, it was clear her situation was not simple. Sure enough, after bathing, she discovered someone had broken into her room, and it was none other than her stepfather Sam. It turned out she had fled here to escape Sam. Emily struggled desperately, trying to run to the third floor for Dr. Madden's help, but Sam caught up to her. As she resisted with all her strength, Dr. Madden heard the noise, came out with a scalpel, and stopped Sam. But Sam accidentally tumbled down the stairs. When Emily awoke, Dr. Madden had already bandaged her wounds and assured her that her stepfather would never bother her again. It was then that Emily realized the room was as cold as an ice cellar. Dr. Madden explained that he had a rare skin disease, and only in low temperatures could he prevent its attacks. But after Emily left, a clear, viscous liquid began to drip from Dr. Madden's head. That night, Emily was awakened from her sleep and saw red liquid seeping down from the ceiling. Worried that Dr. Madden was in danger, she quietly went up to the third floor. But when she pushed open the door, she saw Dr. Madden and Lena dismembering her stepfather, and the red liquid dripping from the ceiling was his blood. Terrified, Emily fainted on the spot. When she woke again, she found herself lying in bed, and the bloodstains on the ceiling were gone. Emily thought she had only dreamt a nightmare. Dr. Madden came to change her bandages and explained that the strange vision might have been caused by the medication. But when removing the gauze, Dr. Madden stared at her face and accidentally cut his own finger. To Emily's shock, his blood was a clear, sticky fluid. The next day, Emily went to a restaurant across from the apartment to look for work, but the owner was stunned when he learned she was living in Dr. Madden's home. The owner said nothing more but told her that if she could persuade 2 policemen to leave tips, she could stay and work. But when Emily approached the policemen, she saw the file in their hands, and the missing person listed was her stepfather. In that instant, Emily realized what had happened was no dream. She rushed back to the apartment, demanding to know what Dr. Madden had done with her stepfather. Dr. Madden did not hide it. He said he was conducting research and needed a free test subject. Unable to accept the truth, Emily decided to pack up and leave. But Dr. Madden stepped out to stop her. He suddenly grew weak because he could not leave his room for too long. With Emily's help, he lay back in his ice chamber and finally recovered somewhat. He then revealed a secret. In the Necronomicon, he had discovered a ritual of eternal life. In nature, there existed a microorganism called a water bear, which could revive even after its body had dried up, as long as it touched water. Dr. Madden had experimented on himself, and though it had kept him alive for over 150 years, his body had to remain constantly chilled. He picked up a withered rose, injected it with a mysterious serum, and the rose bloomed fresh and vivid again. Emily was swayed by Dr. Madden's sweet words, and they shared a passionate night together. But as Emily prepared to leave, Lena suddenly appeared behind her. Lena loved Dr. Madden deeply, but she did not harm Emily. Instead, she revealed the truth. For Dr. Madden to stay young, he had to keep injecting spinal fluid extracted from humans, because he could not leave his room. Lena had been the one finding and killing victims all these years. If Emily wished to be with him, she too would have to accept this. Emily could not accept it, and chose to leave. But a month later, she returned to the apartment, only to discover their new prey was the restaurant owner. Emily rushed to stop them and learned the owner had come only to check on her safety, but had become Lena's target. Now Dr. Madden had only one choice: to silence Emily and keep the secret hidden. But Dr. Madden could not bring himself to hurt her. Under the searing flames, Dr. Madden's body began to melt away like a candle. At that moment, Lena shot Emily from behind, and Dr. Madden could only watch helplessly. In the end, he gradually melted into a pool of liquid. Lena was about to shoot Emily again, but one sentence from Emily left her frozen in place.
Pregnant with his baby.
Annie told Dale that it was Lena who saved her mother, and after she was born, she also suffered from the same illness as Dr. Madden. But after hearing this story, Dale sneered, believing that Annie and Emily were actually the same person. Hearing this, Annie stopped pretending and admitted that she truly was Emily. She revealed her stomach hidden under her clothes, and it turned out the child had never been born, so she needed large amounts of spinal fluid to nourish the baby. Just as Dale prepared to call the police, his legs suddenly gave out, and he collapsed to the ground. Emily had already slipped something into his tea. As soon as she finished speaking, Lena slowly emerged from the room. The endless twists of the second story left Lovecraft utterly thrilled. But just then, he noticed another door open inside the vault, and the room felt increasingly sinister. So he quickly entered the third story. The protagonists were a pair of police officers from Philadelphia, a married couple who were hunting down a deranged killer known as the Butcher. But unlike usual, Sarah seemed unusually irritable that day. After her husband kept pressing her, she finally admitted she was unexpectedly pregnant, and Sarah was very worried whether she could be a good mother. Paul quickly comforted her, reminding her at least to take care of her own safety first. But just as he finished speaking, their police car collided with the Butcher's vehicle and flipped over. In her daze, Sarah saw someone in purple boots drag her husband out of the car. After Sarah freed herself, she immediately called for backup. But in the chaos of this neighborhood, the radio couldn't reach headquarters, so she had to chase after him alone. Following the trail of blood, Sarah tracked it deep into an abandoned building. There, she encountered a man who insisted he was only the landlord of the warehouse, and that the Butcher was merely a tenant. Under Sarah's threats, Mr. Benedict agreed to lead her to the Butcher. But halfway there, a blind, heavy-set woman suddenly appeared, nearly shooting Sarah dead.
Smells very pretty.
Their conversation was unsettling, but Sarah's only concern was to save her husband as quickly as possible. She went to Mr. Benedict's home and treated her wound briefly. Just as she was about to resume her search, Mrs. Benedict said something strange.
I bet he didn't tell you the Butcher's an alien.
With Mr. Benedict leading the way, they followed the blood deeper, but the surroundings suddenly became bizarre, as if they had stepped into ancient ruins. The blood trail led them to the edge of a bottomless pit. Mr. Benedict complained that the blood dirtied his shoes, so he slipped protective covers over them. Seeing the purple boots, Sarah instantly realized Mr. Benedict was the Butcher, but as they faced off, Mrs. Benedict suddenly appeared and shoved her into the pit. When Sarah climbed to her feet, she finally saw it clearly. The corpses of the Butcher's victims were piled up everywhere. Something lunged from the darkness, and she fired wildly, only to find that when the bullets pierced the walls, green slime oozed out, as if the cave itself were alive. She then heard her husband's voice behind her, but as she approached, she was horrified to see his body had been hollowed out. Moments later, a monster burst out of his emptied skin. Sarah killed the creature, but to her horror, her husband's voice spoke from its mouth, saying his mind had been stolen. More monsters swarmed toward her, but Sarah, overwhelmed with fear, lost her will to fight. Soon after, Mr. and Mrs. Benedict appeared, selecting organs from her body to feed the creatures. The next second, Sarah awoke in a hospital, with Mr. Benedict now her attending doctor. It turned out everything had been a nightmare after the car accident, but just as she was about to relax, she suddenly noticed green mucus oozing from the hospital room walls, and her husband in the next bed was nothing but an empty shell. Mrs. Benedict slowly unbuttoned her clothes. She was actually a monster wearing human skin, and Sarah's child had been transplanted into her belly. When the orderly lifted the sheets, Sarah realized her own legs were gone. In the next instant, she was back in the cavern again, but as the creatures consumed her, Sarah only let out manic laughter. After reading the third story, even Lovecraft was mentally exhausted from fear. Suddenly, the monk burst in, demanding that he open the door, but the key had already fallen into the pool, and he had no way to open it. Looking at the Necronomicon on the table, the monk urged him to put it back immediately, but it was already too late, as two tentacles shot up from the pool, wrapping tightly around Lovecraft's legs. A monster surfaced from the water, but Lovecraft showed no fear, drawing a sword hidden inside his cane and striking the creature dead in one blow. At that moment, the monk squeezed through the narrow bars, revealing he wasn't human either. As the last door of the vault opened, a terrifying suction pulled at the room. The monk told Lovecraft that anyone who read the Necronomicon must pay with their life, but Lovecraft would not accept it, and he tore off the monk's face. It was then he realized the monk too was a creature wearing human skin. Moments later, the vault door fully opened, and a massive hand reached out from the black tunnel, dragging the monk inside. As the curse completed its equivalent exchange, the door finally closed. Lovecraft didn't linger, leaving quickly with the Necronomicon in the same taxi that had brought him. This film was adapted from several short stories in Lovecraft's work, Necronomicon. Though aged and a bit rough in quality, the film's props and special effects are still impressive, and with endless twists in its plot, it remains an excellent Cthulhu-inspired piece.